What if the celestial blade poised to end an era was not a harbinger of doom, but merely a passing shadow? Imagine, for a moment, that the Chicxulub asteroid, in its silent journey through the void, had its trajectory altered by just a fraction of a degree. A cosmic miscalculation that allowed it to streak past our world, a fiery teardrop that never fell. If the reign of the dinosaurs never met its violent, abrupt end, what became of the world they were allowed to keep? The true mystery is not their survival, but the profound, unnerving silence that followed it. A silence that stretches across 60 million years, a ghost echo in the geological record where a symphony of life should be. It is as if a great library, filled with the unwritten epics of a saurian age, was discovered with every single page inexplicably, hauntingly blank. This timeline, this unwritten history, is a testament to the power of a single moment. If exploring these forgotten chapters of what could have been resonates with you, consider subscribing to our channel to continue these journeys into the quiet corners of possibility. In this world that dodged its fate, the late Cretaceous period simply flowed into the next age, uninterrupted. The planet remained a hothouse, a canvas of emerald and ochre, where vast shallow seas cleaved continents in two. The atmosphere was thick, heavy with the scent of damp ferns and the metallic tang of distant eruptions, painting the sunsets in hues of volcanic orange and deep violet. This was a world of titans, a planet whose very heartbeat was the rhythmic, thudding gait of saurian feet on soft, loamy earth, a dynasty that never knew it was granted a reprieve. Life before the non-event and for millions of years after was a spectacle of biological grandeur. Herds of triceratops, like living, braving fortresses, moved through ancient cycad forests, their passage a slow, deliberate force of nature. The Tyrannosaurus rex was not a collection of fossilized bones in a museum, but a living apex predator, its roar a physical presence that could shake the humid air and send ripples across still waters. In the skies, colossal pterosaurs like Quetzalcoatlus soared on thermal updrafts, their immense wingspans casting fleeting, eclipsing shadows over a world that had known no other masters. The oceans teemed with mosasaurs, serpentine leviathans that ruled the warm, teeming waters with absolute authority. This was the planet's established order, a brutal, elegant balance perfected over 150 million years of unbroken rule. The asteroid's near miss was the quietest turning point in the history of life, a flicker of light in the prehistoric sky, perhaps mistaken for a fleeting star by some unblinking saurian eye, was all that marked the moment of salvation. The cataclysmic chain of events, the global winter, the acid rain, the mass starvation, was averted. The planet's dominant life forms were not violently reset. Instead, they were allowed to continue their evolutionary journey. They thrived, diversifying and adapting to the slow, creeping climate changes of the Cenozoic era. They filled every ecological niche, their forms shifting and changing over eons, creating a fossil record rich with creatures we can only imagine. Their dominion was absolute, their future seemingly secure, stretching out into a horizon of millions of years, an empire of flesh and bone under an indifferent sun. But then, as we trace this alternate fossil record forward in time, a new and far more subtle mystery begins to emerge. Around 5 million years ago, in a period paleontologists of this timeline would later name the Great Hush, something inexplicable occurs. Across a geologically brief span of time, perhaps only a few thousand years, all non-avian dinosaur genera vanish. They disappear from every continent, from every ecosystem, simultaneously. There is no evidence of a sudden catastrophe. No impact crater scars the Earth's crust, no layer of iridium dust blankets the rock, no signs of catastrophic volcanism are found. It is a silent, global disappearance, a biological empire that had ruled for over 200 million years, vanishing not with a bang, but with a gradual, chilling whisper. This erasure leaves behind an eerie, planetary emptiness, a void in the story of life. The deafening silence in the geological layers is a mystery far deeper than any asteroid impact. How could an entire global ecosystem, robust and dominant for longer than humanity can comprehend, simply fade away? What force, subtle yet absolute, could orchestrate such a quiet, complete extinction, leaving almost no trace of its methods? The world that was saved from a fiery death by a cosmic fluke was instead claimed by a creeping enigma. The question is no longer what if they survived, but rather what did they become, and what or who ensured their story would end in a whisper
leaving behind nothing but a question mark carved into deep time. In our telling of Earth's grand story, the end of the Cretaceous period is a chapter written in fire and ash. We have given it a name, the KPG extinction event, a stark boundary line drawn in the planet's geological diary. Science tells us a story of a celestial dagger, nearly 6 miles wide, plunging into the warm, shallow waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The impact, 1 billion times more powerful than an atomic bomb, sent a wave of devastation across the globe, a wound in the fabric of time itself.
It was an event of such unimaginable violence that it reset the course of evolution, ending a reign that had lasted for over 150 million years and plunging the world into a long, suffocating twilight. The evidence for this cataclysm is etched into the very rock beneath our feet. Geologists across the world have found a thin, dark layer of sediment separating the age of reptiles from the age of mammals. It is a geological scar, a demarcation line rich in the element iridium. This metal is rare on Earth's surface, but abundant in asteroids, a cosmic fingerprint left at the scene of a planetary crime. This iridium layer is the global echo of the impact, a fine dust that settled from a sky choked with vaporized rock and celestial debris. It is a silent, chemical testament to a day when the heavens fell, a thin silver epitaph for a world that was lost, buried under 66 million years of subsequent history. The wound itself, long healed by the slow, patient processes of geology, has also been found. Buried beneath the Yucatan Peninsula lies the ghost of the Chicxulub crater, a colossal circular structure over 100 miles in diameter. Its features, mapped by gravity and seismic surveys, tell a story of unimaginable energy release, of tsunamis that washed over continents, and a heat blast that incinerated forests thousands of miles away. It is the definitive proof, the focal point of the extinction narrative we have come to accept as truth. This crater is the tombstone of the dinosaurs, the physical anchor for the story of their sudden, violent end, and the subsequent, improbable rise of our own mammalian ancestors from the ashes. But in the alternate library of Earth's history, this chapter is conspicuously absent. In that timeline, the iridium layer was never laid down. The Chicxulub crater is merely a quiet patch of seabed, undisturbed by any cosmic violence. The story of life does not have a sharp, punctuated ending, but instead flows onward, a continuous narrative. The dinosaurs, granted an unexpected clemency by a celestial near-miss, simply continued. They walked from the Cretaceous into the Paleogene, and then into the Neogene, their world changing slowly, glacially around them. They adapted not to a sudden apocalypse, but to the creeping, gentle shifts of a planet aging gracefully, their dynasty unknowingly extended by a chance encounter that never was. Imagine then a Cenozoic era not defined by the rise of mammals, but by the continued diversification of the Saurian Empire. As the planet gradually cooled and forests gave way to vast grasslands, new forms would have evolved. Perhaps herds of smaller, fleeter ceratopsians, akin to terrestrial rhinos, grazed on the open plains. Maybe lithe, feathered dromaeosaurs, the raptors of our imagination, adapted to hunt in packs across these new open landscapes, their intelligence sharpened by the demands of cooperative hunting. The great sauropods might have dwindled in a cooler, less lush world, but other, more specialized giants could have taken their place. This was not a static world, but a dynamic one, a thriving ecosystem continuing its grand evolutionary experiment. In our world, extinction is a fundamental force of nature, a process of creative destruction. It can be a slow, grinding affair, as species are outcompeted or fail to adapt to a changing climate. Or it can be swift and brutal, a planetary reset button pushed by volcanism or impact events. We study these endings to understand the fragility and resilience of life. We look for the culprits, the chemical signatures, the impact debris, the massive lava flows that tell us how a world can die. These mass extinctions, for all their horror, follow a certain grim logic. They are events of cause and effect, of action and reaction, written in a language of geological violence that we have slowly learned to read. But the great hush of this alternate timeline defies all of this established logic. When the paleontologists of this world examine the fossil record from 5 million years ago, they find a mystery that has no precedent. The rich tapestry of saurian life, which had flourished for over 200 million years, simply unravels. From one geological stratum to the next, they are gone. All of them, everywhere. There is no iridium layer to signal an impact,
no vast fields of volcanic basalt to suggest a planet poisoning its own atmosphere. There are no signs of a gradual decline, no evidence of being outcompeted. It is a biological void, a silent, inexplicable erasure. The scientific community in this timeline would be fractured, locked in a debate that makes our own controversies seem trivial. They would drill ice cores, analyze sediment layers, and map the ancient crust, searching for a cause that simply isn't there. Every test for a known extinction trigger would come back negative. It would be as if an entire kingdom of life, the most successful and enduring dynasty of complex animals the planet had ever known, was simply edited out of existence. The absence of a cause would become the most terrifying clue of all, suggesting a force or a phenomenon completely outside their understanding of how life on Earth works. It would be a mystery on a planetary scale. The sheer scale of the disappearance is what makes it so profoundly unnerving. This was not just the loss of apex predators or giant herbivores.
It was the collapse of an entire global biological system. The oceans, once home to advanced marine reptiles descended from the mosasaurs, fell silent. The skies, dominated by the pterosaur lineage, were emptied. Every niche on every continent that had been occupied by a non-avian dinosaur for eons was suddenly vacant. It was a planetary house occupied for millennia, found one day to be utterly empty, with no sign of a struggle, no forwarding address, just a cold, lingering silence in rooms that were once filled with a vibrant, thundering life. Time, in the 5 million years since the Great Hush, has been a silent accomplice to the mystery. The great ice ages of the Pleistocene would have advanced and retreated, their colossal glaciers acting like planetary erasers, scouring landscapes and grinding mountains to dust. Any subtle clues left on the surface would have been pulverized and scattered. Tectonic plates, in their inexorable dance, would have subducted entire coastlines, dragging potential evidence down into the molten mantle of the Earth. Rivers would have changed their courses, burying ancient deltas under miles of new sediment. The planet itself seems to have conspired to keep the secret, wrapping the event in layers of rock and ice and eons of indifference. And so, the central question of this world's science is not about a beginning, but about an ending. It is a question that hangs over all subsequent life, including the eventual rise of a certain clever primate. What could cause such a specific, total, and traceless extinction? What kind of force operates with the precision of a surgeon, removing an entire class of life while leaving the rest of the ecosystem relatively intact? The Great Hush is more than a paleontological puzzle. It is a profound philosophical conundrum. It suggests that the rules of life and death on a planetary scale might be far stranger and more mysterious than we could ever imagine, and that even the greatest empires can vanish, not with a roar, but with a final, inaudible whisper. In the quiet laboratories of this alternate present, the mystery of the Great Hush is not a fringe theory, but the central, unifying question of modern science. Teams of paleontologists, geologists, and climatologists coordinate across continents, sharing data from deep ice cores, sediment layers, and fossil beds, all in a desperate search for a culprit. They are detectives investigating a crime with no body, no weapon, and a victim that spans an entire planet. The first and most obvious suspect, a specter from our own timeline's history, was an impact from space. But exhaustive sky surveys and ground-penetrating radar have revealed nothing. The Earth's skin is unblemished by any crater of the appropriate age or size. The silent, indifferent cosmos appears to have an alibi, leaving investigators to turn their gaze downward, toward the planet itself. The Earth's own history of violence was the next logical place to look. Our planet can be its own worst enemy, capable of spewing poison from its molten heart. Scientists searched for the telltale signs of a supervolcanic episode, vast flood basalts that can choke the atmosphere and trigger runaway climate change. They drilled into the Siberian traps, the Deccan traps, searching for any sign of a massive eruption around the 5 million year mark. Yet the rocks remain silent. The layers of basalt and ash that mark other great extinctions are conspicuously absent. The planet did not poison its children. It seems to have simply watched them go, a passive, silent witness to their inexplicable departure. The very ground beneath their feet offers no confession. Could it have been a more subtle betrayal, a slow, creeping change in the climate that pushed the Saurian dynasty past a point of no return? To answer this, paleoclimatologists meticulously reconstruct the ancient world.
They analyzed the isotopes in fossilized shells and the distribution of ancient pollen grains, painting a picture of the climate 5 million years ago. What they find is not a world in crisis, but a world in slow, gentle transition. The planet was gradually cooling, yes, but the change was happening over millions of years, a pace to which life had always adapted. The dinosaurs of this era were not lumbering relics of a hothouse past. They were highly evolved, diverse creatures perfectly suited to this cooler, drier world. The climate was not a killer, it was simply the stage. If the threat came neither from the sky above nor the earth below, then perhaps it came from life itself. The investigation turns inward, to the realm of biology, to the invisible world of pathogens. Could a plague, a hyper-virulent disease engineered by evolution, have been the silent executioner? This theory is compelling because it offers a cause that would leave few geological traces. Paleogeneticists search for fragments of ancient viral DNA locked within the fossilized bone marrow of the last dinosaurs, hoping to find a genetic ghost. They imagine a disease that targets a specific quirk of saurian biology, a key that unlocks their cells and dismantles them from the inside out, spreading like a silent, unstoppable fire across the globe. But the sheer, perfect efficiency of such a plague strains the limits of biological possibility.
How could a single pathogen spread to every continent, across vast oceans, to isolated islands, and into every conceivable ecological niche simultaneously? How could it infect airborne pterosaurs, terrestrial tyrannosaurs, and deep-diving marine reptiles with equal lethality? A disease that's specialized enough to target only non-avian dinosaurs would likely burn itself out in isolated populations. A disease general enough to cross oceans and infect diverse species would almost certainly have jumped to other animals. Yet the rest of the ecosystem remained largely untouched. The pandemic theory, for all its chilling elegance, presents a logistical and evolutionary nightmare that simply doesn't add up. We then turn our eyes to the vast hidden world of the oceans. For millions of years, these waters were not empty voids, but thriving ecosystems ruled by apex predators descended from the great mosasaurs of the Cretaceous. These were intelligent, streamlined hunters, the saurian equivalent of orcas and great white sharks. When we examine the marine fossil record, the silence is just as absolute. They vanish at the exact same 5 million year boundary. This discovery deals a fatal blow to the simple pandemic hypothesis. A disease would have to be a biological miracle capable of transmitting through both air and water, and of targeting physiological systems that had diverged over tens of millions of years of evolution. The mystery only deepens beneath the waves. The global, synchronous nature of the event, affecting both land and sea, is what makes it so profoundly unsettling. It suggests a cause that was not bound by the normal rules of geography or biology. It acted on a planetary scale with a precision that defies natural explanation. Imagine a gardener tending to a vast ancient plot and deciding in a single afternoon to remove every variety of rose, leaving all other flowers untouched. This is what the Great Hush looks like in the fossil record. It is an act of impossible specificity, a biological erasure so clean and so total that it feels less like a natural catastrophe and more like a deliberate, calculated act. But calculated by whom or what? This leads the inquiry into its most speculative and uncomfortable territory. If no external force and no internal biological agent can be identified, what is left? Could a species, after 200 million years of dominance, simply lose the will to exist? Could they have reached an evolutionary dead end, a collective stagnation that made them unable to cope with even the slightest environmental pressure? This idea, known as racial senescence in early, now discredited paleontological theories, feels unscientific, more philosophical than factual. And yet, when all logical doors are closed, the imagination begins to wander down these darker, more abstract corridors of thought, searching for an answer in the very nature of life and time. The problem with this concept is that evolution does not work that way. Life is relentless, opportunistic. An entire global dynasty does not simply give up. Specialization can lead to extinction for some, but it almost always creates opportunities for others. The Saurian world was a vibrant tapestry of specialists and generalists, of giants and dwarfs, of hunters and herbivores. A single point of failure could not possibly unravel the entire tapestry at once. The system was too robust, too ancient, too deeply woven into the fabric of the planet's biology. Their disappearance was not the slow fraying of an old rope, but the sudden, clean cut of an impossibly sharp blade. Findings like this remind us how little we truly know.
If you're fascinated by these missing pieces of history and the profound questions they raise about our own place in the universe, subscribing will keep you close to the next revelation on our journey into the unknown. Each new fossil bed that is opened, each deep-sea core that is analyzed, adds not a solution but another layer of complexity to the enigma. The scientists in this timeline are not just mapping the history of life, they are confronting the limits of their own understanding, staring into an abyss of ignorance that grows wider with every new piece of data that confirms the impossible. Let us consider the very air they breathed. Perhaps the killer was a subtle, invisible change in the atmospheric composition, a shift in trace gases that was harmless to mammals and birds, but fatal to the unique respiratory system of the dinosaurs. Researchers turned to the most delicate of time capsules, droplets of ancient amber. Within these fossilized jewels of tree sap, tiny air bubbles from 5 million years ago are perfectly preserved. They are microscopic snapshots of the prehistoric atmosphere. Laser spectrometry is used to analyze their contents, molecule by molecule. The results are once again maddeningly normal. The oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide levels are all within expected parameters. The air itself is innocent. The investigation, having exhausted all natural explanations, is forced to confront a radical, almost unthinkable hypothesis. What if the extinction was not an accident, but a choice? What if in the final chapters of their long range, a lineage of dinosaurs achieved sapience, a level of intelligence that allowed them to manipulate their environment, to build a civilization, and perhaps to orchestrate their own departure?
This idea is the last refuge of a science that has run out of answers. It is a desperate leap into the unknown, an attempt to explain the inexplicable by invoking a consciousness, a will that could act on a planetary scale. It is a ghost story told in the language of paleontology. The immediate objection is the utter lack of evidence. Where are the ruins, the artifacts, the fossilized cities? A global technological civilization, no matter how alien, should leave some mark, some chemical or geological scar upon the planet. But the surface of the Earth is clean. There are no strange isotopic signatures, no synthetic polymer deposits in the sediment, no quarries or mines scarring the ancient landscapes. If a saurian intelligence existed, it was either completely non-technological, a civilization of pure thought and biology, or it was so advanced that it could erase its own footsteps from the sands of time with perfect, absolute precision, leaving behind not a single shard of pottery, not a single tool. Perhaps we are looking for the wrong clues. Maybe their technology was not one of steel and stone, but of flesh and bone. Imagine a civilization that learned to manipulate genetics, to shape their own evolution as a sculptor shapes clay. They could have built living tools, grown organic structures, and integrated their existence so perfectly with the natural world that their cities would be indistinguishable from a forest, their machines mistaken for unusual flora. In this scenario, their disappearance could have been a migration, not an extinction, a conscious, deliberate journey away from the physical world, a transcendence into a form or a place that leaves no fossils behind for us to puzzle over. The survivors of the Great Hush tell their own silent story. The small mammals, the birds descended from a different dinosaurian line, the lizards, the turtles, they all passed through this mysterious boundary. They did not thrive by outcompeting the dinosaurs. They simply inherited a world that had been suddenly and inexplicably emptied. It was as if the lords of the manor had vanished overnight, leaving the servants to wander through the silent, cavernous halls. The pattern of survival is one of the most telling clues. The force that caused the disappearance was not a blunt instrument of destruction. It was a scalpel, wielded with unimaginable precision, excising one specific sprawling family from the book of life. This level of selectivity is, perhaps, the most unnatural aspect of the entire event. Mass extinctions in our world are messy, chaotic affairs. An asteroid or a supervolcano is indiscriminate, killing with fire, acid, and darkness. They cause a cascade of collapse that tears through the entire food web, taking the strong and the weak alike. The Great Hush was the opposite. It was orderly, quiet, and ruthlessly specific. It targeted the rulers of the planet, from the smallest compsognathid to the mightiest titanosaur, and left the bystanders almost completely unharmed. It's a signature that doesn't match any known natural phenomenon, a fingerprint left at the scene of the crime that belongs to no one in the known universe. And so we are left with a profound and unsettling silence. The scientific method, a tool designed to illuminate the darkness of the past, has only deepened the shadows. Every question has led to a more profound mystery. Every avenue of investigation has ended in a perfect, featureless wall. The story of the dinosaurs in this timeline does not conclude with a fiery exclamation point,
but with a quiet, lingering question mark. It is a cosmic riddle, a planetary enigma that suggests the rules of life and death may be far stranger than we have ever allowed ourselves to imagine. The absence of an answer becomes the answer itself, pointing toward a truth that lies outside the realm of our experience. The timeline of life has been severed. On one side, a 200-million-year dynasty, a vibrant and complex world teeming with saurian life in all its magnificent forms. On the other side, a void, an eerie, empty planet waiting for a new story to begin. The transition between these two states is marked by no violence, no catastrophe, only a sudden and inexplicable quiet. It is a chapter of planetary history that appears to have been deliberately torn out, leaving behind only the ragged edges. This geological amnesia is more terrifying than any impact crater because it implies an agent, a force with the ability to not just end a world but to edit its memory. This quiet disappearance has reshaped the philosophical landscape for the intelligent species that would eventually arise. Humanity in this world evolved with the constant, humbling knowledge that they were not the first. They grew up in the shadow of a greater, older empire that had vanished for reasons unknown. The Great Hush serves as a constant, silent warning. It suggests that dominance is temporary, that intelligence is not a guarantee of permanence, and that a civilization can be erased so completely that it becomes little more than a ghost story, a whisper in the deep rock. It is a lesson in humility, written on a planetary scale. The fossil record itself becomes a haunted library. Every bone bed, every articulated skeleton of the creatures that lived before the Hush is a testament to this profound loss.
Paleontologists are not just scientists, they are archaeologists of a silent apocalypse, sifting through the remains of a world that was not destroyed, but simply vacated. They catalog the endless forms, the beautiful adaptations, the sheer biological success of the Saurian dynasty, and at the end of it all, they are left with the same single unanswerable question: where did they all go? The question hangs in the air of every museum, in the pages of every textbook. The final analysis of the evidence leaves the scientific community in a state of quiet bewilderment. They have ruled out every known natural cause. They are left with only two possibilities, both of which sound like fiction. Either an unknown, undiscovered law of nature allows for these silent, selective extinctions, a sort of planetary reset button, or the dinosaurs were removed by an external intelligence, a cosmic force that acted with purpose and precision. Both possibilities are equally terrifying, for they suggest that we live in a universe whose fundamental rules we do not begin to comprehend, and that our own existence might be far more precarious than we believe. The stage is now set for a discovery that will shatter even these radical hypotheses. All the searching on the continents, in the ice, and in the air has yielded nothing. The secret of the Great Hush, it turns out, was not buried under the earth. It was hidden in a place no one thought to look, a place of crushing pressure and absolute darkness, miles beneath the surface of the waves. The planet has held its secret close, waiting for a new intelligence to evolve, to build machines capable of plumbing the depths, and to finally stumble upon the single, silent artifact that would reframe everything they thought they knew about the history of their own world. The silence is about to be broken. For millions of years, the deep ocean floor has been the planet's final resting place, a silent museum of all that has fallen from the world above. It is a realm of crushing pressure and eternal darkness, where time is measured not in days, but in the slow, patient accumulation of marine snow, the gentle, ceaseless rain of dust, sediment, and the skeletal remains of tiny creatures. We have always viewed it as an archive, a passive ledger of history, but we were wrong. It is not just an archive, it is a vault, a place where a secret of imaginable magnitude was deliberately hidden, waiting for a species with the curiosity and the technology to venture into the crushing, silent dark and turn the key. It was a truth hidden in plain sight, concealed not by earth or stone, but by the simple, vast, and unforgiving veil of water. The mission was routine, a simple geological survey aboard the deep-sea research vessel Odyssey. Its purpose was to drill core samples from the abyssal plains of the Pacific, mapping the ancient volcanic crust to better understand the slow dance of plate tectonics. The drill, a marvel of modern engineering, was designed to bite through miles of basalt, the hardened blood of the planet. For weeks it had performed its task perfectly, sending back cylinders of rock that told a predictable billion-year-old story.
But then, 3 miles beneath the waves, in a region of oceanic crust precisely dated to 5 million years ago, the drill stopped. It didn't break. It simply encountered something it could not penetrate, a material whose hardness and resilience were completely off the geological charts. The initial data that streamed back to the surface was so bizarre, so outside the realm of known geology, that it was immediately flagged as a catastrophic instrument failure. The sensors reported a structure of impossible thinness and perfect geometric regularity. It was like drilling into a mountain of granite and suddenly hitting a sheet of glass no thicker than a pane of window. The feedback was a glitch in the expected narrative of the Earth's crust, a single, sharp, impossible note in the deep, rumbling chord of geological time. On the screens of the Odyssey, a ghost appeared in the machine, an anomaly so profound it seemed to mock the very science that was trying to measure it, a whisper from a past that wasn't supposed to exist. As remotely operated vehicles with high-resolution sonar were sent down to investigate, the true nature of the anomaly began to reveal itself, and the bewilderment on the ship turned to a silent, collective awe. Spread across the ocean floor, embedded in the volcanic rock, was a vast crystalline lattice. It was not a city of towers and streets, but something far stranger, more alien. It resembled a planetary-scale circuit board, or perhaps a single miles-wide snowflake forged from unknown materials. Its patterns were intricate, non-Euclidean, branching out in fractal designs that seemed to defy the simple, brutal logic of geology. It was an object that radiated intelligence, a perfectly preserved thought form given physical shape and laid to rest on the quiet, dark bed of the sea. The temporal significance of the discovery was immediate and chilling. The basaltic rock that encased these impossible structures was not just ancient, it was precisely 5 million years ago. It had formed during the exact geological moment that the Great Hush had fallen over the planet. This was no coincidence.
The artifact was not something that had fallen into the ocean. It had been placed there, and the cooling lava of the seafloor had flowed around it, preserving it like a fly in amber. It was a tombstone, a memorial, a final message left at the precise date and time that an entire global dynasty of life had vanished from the world. The greatest mystery in the history of life was now anchored to a single physical object of undeniable, intelligent design. Analysis of small fragments, carefully retrieved by robotic arms, only deepened the enigma. The material was a fusion of organic and inorganic matter, a biocrystalline alloy that had no natural counterpart. It was composed of intricate carbon polymers, like the building blocks of life, woven together with strands of rare earth metals in a way that defied the laws of chemistry. It was as if a living creature had learned to grow a skeleton of superconductive metal, a perfect marriage of biology and technology. It was a material that could only have been created by a civilization that had erased the line between the machine and the organism, a life form that did not build its technology, but grew it as a tree grows its branches. The structure itself was almost completely inert. It emitted a faint, residual energy signature, a ghostly hum on the most sensitive instruments, like the cooling embers of a fire that had gone out millions of years ago. It did not transmit. It did not compute. It did not move. It simply was. Its silence was profound, a perfect mirror to the geological silence of the Great Hush. This was not a tool or a weapon or a derelict starship. Its function seemed to be its form, its purpose to simply exist, a silent testament to its creators. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into the deep ocean of time, with no expectation that its recipients would ever understand the language in which it was written. Its quiet presence was more powerful than any shout. This single, impossible discovery shattered the foundations of human science and history. It was the ultimate out-of-place artifact, a discovery so paradigm-shifting that it rendered all previous models of the past obsolete. It was like finding a perfectly preserved steam engine in a Bronze Age tomb. Suddenly, every other minor anomaly and unexplained curiosity in the paleontological record, previously dismissed as statistical noise or misinterpretation, had to be re-examined. History was not a straight line, but a palimpsest, a scroll that had been written on, erased, and written on again. Humanity was just the latest story, and the ghost of the previous one was now staring back at them from the bottom of the sea. Scientists now looked again at the strange, geometrically perfect microfossils found in sediment layers from 5 million years ago. Previously classified as an unusual type of crystalline diatom, these pollen grains now took on a sinister new meaning. Their perfect hexagonal structures, their unnatural symmetry, no longer looked like the work of blind evolution. They looked manufactured.
They were not pollen grains, they were microscopic machines, perhaps a form of biological nanotechnology, a utility fog that could have been used to build, to heal, or perhaps to dismantle an entire ecosystem with surgical precision. They were the tools of a civilization that worked on a scale we could barely comprehend, from the planetary down to the microscopic. They also revisited the great dinosaur bone beds of Patagonia, vast graveyards from the final days before the Great Hush. The strange, almost deliberate arrangement of the skeletons had always been a puzzle. They were not scattered and torn apart, as one would expect from a natural catastrophe. Instead, they were often laid out in neat, ordered rows, sorted by species. At the time, it was explained away by bizarre water currents or unusual sedimentary processes. But now, in the light of the abyssal lattice, these sites looked less like fossil beds and more like cemeteries. They were evidence of ritual, of a culture grappling with its own end, a species that did not just die, but that took the time to bury its dead with a strange, silent reverence. The great Saurian civilization was a ghost in the planetary machine. It had existed for an unknown length of time, hidden from the crude lens of geology, because its very nature was antithetical to the evidence we were trained to look for. We searched for quarries, for roads, for cities of stone and steel, for the chemical scars of industrial waste. We were looking for a reflection of ourselves, a civilization that conquered nature by reshaping it with brute force. We never considered a civilization that did not conquer nature, but instead merged with it, becoming an inextricable part of the planet's biological operating system. Their camouflage was perfection itself. Imagine a technology not of extraction and refinement, but of growth and cultivation. A civilization that had mastered genetics to the point where they could program living cells as we program computers. Their buildings would be living, self-repairing organisms, their vehicles grown from chrysalises, their tools extensions of their own bodies. When such a civilization vanished, what would it leave behind? Its cities would not crumble into ruins, they would simply be reabsorbed back into the forest. Its machines would not rust, they would biodegrade.
The absence of evidence was not proof of their non-existence. It was in fact the signature of their unique, biologically integrated genius. They had mastered the art of living without leaving a scar. So why, after mastering the art of traceless existence, would they leave behind this one singular permanent artifact? The abyssal lattice is the great contradiction, the exception that proves the rule. It is so inorganic, so permanent, so deliberately monumental. It is like a master of stealth who, after a lifetime of moving unseen, chooses to leave a single brightly colored feather behind at the scene of his final disappearance. It was not an accident, it was a statement, a deliberate breadcrumb left for a future intelligence to find. It was designed to endure the slow grind of eons, to survive the shifting of continents, to lie in silent wait in the one place on the planet safe from the erasure of ice and wind and rain. With this new understanding, the Great Hush is entirely reframed. It was not a passive extinction, a failure to adapt. It was an active, deliberate event. It was a departure, a migration, a transcendence. The eerie silence that fell over the planet 5 million years ago was not the sound of a world dying. It was the sound of a door being quietly and firmly closed. The dinosaurs were not wiped out by some external force. They simply left. They packed up their entire biological civilization, erased the blackboard of their existence, and moved on, leaving behind only this one cryptic final message, a silent monument on the dark ocean floor, a final, quiet goodbye. The vast, deep ocean, which we once saw as a barrier separating continents, was in fact a veil hiding the greatest secret the world has ever known. We spent centuries mapping the surfaces of distant planets, searching the stars for signs of intelligent life, all while the proof of a civilization far older and perhaps far wiser than our own lay sleeping beneath our feet. It's like a family living in a house for generations, unaware that the foundation is built upon the ruins of a silent, magnificent cathedral. The greatest discoveries are not always in the heavens above, but sometimes in the quiet, forgotten depths below, in the places we assumed were empty and devoid of all meaning. You can only imagine the quiet, profound shock felt by the team of scientists aboard the Odyssey. In the space of a few hours, they had gone from mundane geological surveyors to the unwilling inheritors of a completely new history of the world. They were the first humans to lay eyes on this impossible truth, to understand that our species was not the first great experiment in intelligence on this planet. It is a moment of discovery so immense that it brings with it not celebration, but a deep, humbling, and terrifying sense of perspective.
They had discovered humanity's place in the universe. We are the tenants of a home whose previous owners vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a single unreadable note. We can compare the abyssal lattice to our own feeble attempts to communicate across the vastness of time and space. We sent the Voyager golden record into the cosmos, a tiny, hopeful whisper carrying the sounds and images of our world, a message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean. This Saurian artifact is the inverse. It is a vast, silent, and incredibly sophisticated message left not for the stars, but for the world itself. It was a message intended for their successors, for the next spark of consciousness to arise from the planet's fertile evolutionary soil. It is an act of incredible foresight, of planning on a geological scale that is almost impossible for our short-lived species to comprehend. The sheer scale and complexity of the lattice speaks to an intelligence that operated on a different level from our own. It is not just the technological achievement of its construction that is staggering, but the philosophical depth behind its creation. What kind of mind can conceive of a project whose intended audience will not exist for millions of years? What kind of civilization possesses such a profound understanding of deep time that it can create a monument designed to survive it? It suggests a consciousness that was not just intelligent, but wise, a species that saw its own existence not as a final destination, but as a single chapter in the planet's much longer story. The discovery of the lattice answers the question of what happened to the dinosaurs, but it opens up a far deeper and more unsettling series of questions. Why? Why did they leave? Were they fleeing something? Or were they moving towards something? Did they see some fundamental limit to physical existence on this planet and choose to transcend it? Or did they simply achieve all they could here, and like a child leaving home, decide it was time to move on to a new, unknown destination? The mystery of their absence has been replaced by the far more profound mystery of their motive. The puzzle has not been solved, only elevated to a higher, more philosophical plane. In the end, the abyssal lattice is like a book written in a language that is utterly alien to our neurology. We can see the intricate grammar in its geometric patterns, we can sense the profound meaning in its silent, patient existence, but we will never be able to translate it.
Its message will forever remain locked away, its secrets guarded by a complexity that our minds are not equipped to decipher. We are like ants crawling across the surface of a microchip, aware that it is a thing of immense and intelligent design, but utterly incapable of understanding its purpose. We are left alone with the knowledge that a message exists and the crushing certainty that we will never know what it says. The deafening geological silence of the Great Hush has now been replaced by the profound, intelligent silence of the artifact. The mystery has shifted from the absence of bones in the rock to the absence of meaning in a clear and deliberate message. It is a far more intimate and unsettling enigma. It is one thing to be the product of a blind, indifferent universe, the victor in a long and brutal evolutionary lottery. It is another thing entirely to discover that you are living in the quiet shadow of a far greater intelligence that chose to depart, leaving you to wonder if your own noisy, chaotic civilization is merely a prelude to your own inevitable, and perhaps equally silent, disappearance. This revelation forces us to look at our own world, at the legacy we ourselves are building. We etch our existence onto the planet in a language of concrete, plastic, and radioactive isotopes, a chaotic and messy scrawl that speaks of our power, but perhaps not our wisdom. The Saurians left behind a single, elegant, and silent poem. The contrast is stark, and it leaves us with a final, chilling question. Is it possible for a civilization to become so advanced, so in tune with the universe, that its greatest achievement is not what it builds, but its ability to vanish without a trace, to close its own chapter with a quiet, deliberate, and graceful hush? The discovery of the abyssal lattice did not end the mystery of the Great Hush. It merely changed its grammar. The question was no longer a passive, what happened to them, but an active, and far more unsettling, what did they do? The evidence pointed not to a catastrophe, but to a meticulously planned and flawlessly executed event. It was a departure, a conscious choice made by a global civilization to remove itself from the world. The eerie silence that had haunted paleontologists for generations was not the sound of an ecosystem collapsing. It was the sound of a page being deliberately and gently turned. The silence was not an absence of life, but an absence of an answer to the most profound question of all: why? One of the most compelling, and perhaps most hopeful, of the emerging hypotheses is that of transcendence.
What if this saurian civilization, after an unbroken evolutionary journey of 200 million years, had simply outgrown the confines of physical reality? Their technology, a seamless fusion of the biological and the mechanical, may have been the key that unlocked the door to a new state of being. Their disappearance was not an end, but a metamorphosis, a shedding of their corporeal forms like a snake sheds its skin. They did not die, they simply moved on, ascending to a higher plane of existence, a realm of pure energy or information that exists parallel to our own, unseen and unfelt. In this scenario, the abyssal lattice is the final physical remnant of that grand transition. It could be the server, the great processor that orchestrated the uploading of an entire planet's worth of consciousness. Imagine a silent, global process where the microscopic nanites, once mistaken for pollen, were the instruments of this ascension. They would have moved through every living saurian, carefully deconstructing their physical bodies while preserving the essence of their minds, their memories, their very souls. It would have been a quiet, sacred process, a final biological pilgrimage from the world of matter to the world of thought. The lattice is the chrysalis left behind after the butterfly has taken flight, a monument to a form they no longer needed. The motive for such a monumental undertaking remains shrouded in the deepest of mysteries. Perhaps their profound understanding of deep time, a perspective granted by their immense longevity as a species, allowed them to foresee a distant, unavoidable cosmic catastrophe. Maybe they detected a gamma-ray burst scheduled to arrive in 1,000,000 years, or the slow, inevitable decay of the planet's magnetic field. Their departure, then, was not an escape born of fear, but a rational act of preservation. They chose to place their 200-million-year-old culture, their entire history, into a lifeboat that could weather the storms of space-time, leaving the physical world to heal and begin anew, unburdened by their presence. This idea reframes the strange ritualistic bone beds in Patagonia. They were not cemeteries in the way we understand them, places of mourning for the dead. Instead, they could have been disassembly sites, the final gathering places for a population preparing for its journey. The orderly arrangement of the skeletons was not a sign of reverence for the deceased, but a mark of the efficiency and order of the process itself. It was the last act of a civilization that valued logic and harmony above all else, a final, quiet piece of planetary housekeeping before turning off the lights and locking the door behind them. It was a departure as clean and as graceful as their entire scarless existence on the planet had been.
The philosophical weight of this possibility is immense. It suggests that the ultimate goal of a civilization is not to conquer the stars, but to conquer the limitations of its own physical form. It posits that intelligence, when allowed to mature over geological timescales, eventually seeks to free itself from the slow, messy, and fragile world of biology. They did not build an empire of stone and steel to last for eternity. They built a bridge to it. Their legacy is a silent challenge to our own species' aspirations, a quiet whisper from the deep that asks if we are building monuments to our power or pathways to our liberation. But what if the silence of the universe is not a sign of emptiness, but of caution? An alternate and far darker hypothesis suggests that the saurians were not alone, and that their departure was not a willing transcendence, but a desperate flight. This theory posits that they made contact with, or were discovered by, an external intelligence, a force from beyond our solar system. The Great Hush was the result of that contact, a planetary evacuation in the face of a threat so profound that vanishing was the only viable option. Their silent, traceless disappearance was not a display of mastery, but an act of cosmic camouflage, an attempt to hide their entire world from an unseen predator. The nature of this external force is a chilling unknown. Was it a hostile intelligence, a galactic empire that consumes or eradicates emerging civilizations? Or was it something more impersonal, a natural phenomenon that follows the development of technology like a shadow? Perhaps there is a great filter, a cosmic law that dictates that any species reaching a certain level of advancement attracts a form of celestial antibody that sterilizes it. The saurians, with their bio-integrated technology and planetary consciousness, may have crossed that fateful threshold, triggering a response they could not fight, only flee from. They ran, and the silence they left behind was the sound of them holding their breath. In this terrifying context, the abyssal lattice takes on a completely different meaning. It is not a monument or a server, it is a warning. Its placement in the crushing, inaccessible darkness of the ocean floor was a deliberate act of concealment. Its inert, silent nature is not a sign of its function being complete, but a feature designed to avoid detection.
It could be a time capsule, a repository of their knowledge, but one locked away with the desperate hope that it would never be found by those they were fleeing from. Or perhaps it is a beacon, but one that is deliberately turned off, a silent lighthouse on a treacherous cosmic shore, its silence a warning of the rocks hidden in the dark. This external threat hypothesis provides a chillingly logical explanation for the surgical precision of the Great Hush. The threat was not a random asteroid or a blind plague. It was an intelligent force that targeted the Saurian civilization specifically. They removed themselves from the equation, sacrificing their world and their 200-million-year-old home, perhaps in the noble hope of saving the planet's remaining biosphere. They took the target off their own backs, and in doing so, they may have saved the nascent mammals, and by extension us, from a fate we cannot even begin to imagine. Their silence was a shield, a final, selfless act of planetary guardianship. This possibility forces us to look up at the night sky not with wonder, but with a newfound sense of dread. It suggests that the silence we hear in our radio telescopes is not an indication that we are alone, but rather that the other intelligent species in the galaxy have learned a vital lesson: stay quiet. It implies that broadcasting our existence, as we have done with our radio waves and space probes, is the cosmic equivalent of a child shouting in a dark forest filled with unseen hunters. The Great Hush becomes a cautionary tale, a ghost story told on a planetary scale, warning us that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Every time we peel back one layer of this mystery, another, more profound one appears beneath it. If that curiosity resonates with you and you wish to continue this journey into the quietest corners of possibility, consider subscribing to follow along as we uncover more. This exploration forces us to confront the unnerving idea that our own future might be reflected in this silent, ancient past. The questions raised by their disappearance are not just about them, but about the fundamental nature of life and intelligence in the cosmos and our own precarious place within it. There is, however, another way to look at this, a perspective that turns its gaze away from the cold vacuum of space and back towards the living, breathing planet itself. What if the Great Hush was not caused by an external force, but by a process inherent to the Earth itself? This is the cyclical hypothesis, the idea that the planet is a kind of superorganism and that sapient intelligence is a recurring natural phase in its life cycle, like the blooming of a flower. A civilization rises, achieves a certain level of integration with the planetary system, and then, its purpose served, it recedes, making way for the next iteration. In this Gaian view, the Saurian civilization was not the planet's first and only experiment with high intelligence, but simply one chapter in a much longer cyclical story.
They understood this. Their deep connection to the world's biological systems gave them an insight into its rhythms, its deep, slow breathing. They knew that their time, like a season, must come to an end. Their disappearance was not an extinction, but a willing, conscious reabsorption back into the planetary consciousness. They did not die, they simply returned to the source, dissolving their individual minds back into the collective intelligence of the Earth. This reframes their biologically integrated technology in a beautiful, poetic light. They never saw themselves as separate from nature, as its conquerors or its stewards. They saw themselves as its highest form of expression, the planet's way of thinking about itself. Their civilization was the Earth's nervous system, a web of consciousness that enmeshed the globe. The Great Hush was the process of that nervous system dissolving, its energy and information flowing back into the soil, the seas, and the very air, enriching the planet for the cycle that was to follow. It was an act of ultimate ecological responsibility, a final, perfect compost. From this perspective, the abyssal lattice is not a tombstone or a warning, but a seed. It is a repository of the essential knowledge, the genetic memory, and the philosophical wisdom of their entire civilization, planted deep within the Earth's crust for safekeeping. It is a gift to the future, a cosmic hard drive left for the next species that achieves sapience. It is not a message for us to read in the conventional sense, but a catalyst, a silent guide intended to help the planet's next flowering of intelligence to reach maturity. We are living in a garden they planted, and the evidence of their work is buried deep in the soil beneath our feet. This hypothesis places a profound responsibility upon our own shoulders. If we are the current cycle, the next bloom in the planet's long history of consciousness, how are we tending to this ancient garden? Are we accessing the wisdom left for us in that silent abyssal seed, or are we ignoring it, paving over the soil with our own noisy, disconnected ambitions? It suggests that our destiny is not to leave the Earth, but to integrate with it more deeply,
to follow the path they laid out and become the new nervous system, the new consciousness of the living planet. Their silence is not an absence, but an invitation. It also explains the perfection of their disappearance. They left no scars, because their entire civilization was designed to be biodegradable. Their cities were living forests, their machines were living creatures, their waste was food for other parts of the ecosystem. When they chose to recede, their world simply melted back into the landscape, leaving behind only the faintest of whispers and this one single indestructible seed. It was the ultimate expression of a philosophy that saw life not as a linear progression, but as a beautiful, endless, and interconnected cycle of growth, bloom, and quiet, graceful decay. But there is a final, darker corridor of speculation, one that requires no external forces or mystical planetary cycles. What if the cause of the Great Hush was entirely internal? What if, after 200 million years of existence, this ancient, wise, and powerful civilization simply chose to end its own story? This is the hypothesis of civilizational suicide, the idea that they reached a philosophical endpoint, a state of collective ennui so profound that non-existence became preferable to a continued and perhaps meaningless existence. They did not fall, they stepped willingly into the void. Imagine a species that has solved every problem, answered every question, and explored every possibility available to it within the physical world. Their mastery over biology and their environment was total. Their understanding of the cosmos, of time, of life itself was complete. What comes after perfection? For a species that had existed for a span of time that is, to us, almost indistinguishable from eternity, perhaps the only frontier left to explore was the one that lay beyond existence itself. Their final act was not one of despair, but of ultimate curiosity. The Great Hush in this somber interpretation was a rational, calculated, and deeply philosophical choice. It was the final, collective decision of a species that had concluded its journey. The strange, orderly bone beds are no longer disassembly sites, but sacred altars of this final ritual. They did not just die, they orchestrated their own end with the same precision, grace, and quiet dignity with which they had lived for eons. It was a slow, planetary ceremony, a final performance for an audience of none, a last testament to their mastery over life, which naturally included mastery over its ending. In this tragic light, the abyssal lattice is transformed once more. It is no longer a warning or a seed, but a gravestone. It is a final, beautiful work of art, a memorial they created for themselves before their departure. Its intricate, silent patterns are the words of their epitaph, written in a language of geometry and exotic matter. It is a testament to all that they were, and a silent, eternal monument to their final, collective choice to be no more. It is the most beautiful suicide note in the history of the universe, a quiet statement of a purpose fulfilled and a story willingly concluded.
This is perhaps the most unnerving hypothesis of all, because it suggests that the greatest threat to an advanced civilization is not an external enemy, but itself. It implies that intelligence, technology, and wisdom do not inevitably lead to infinite expansion and survival, but can, under certain conditions, lead to a rational decision to cease. It suggests a fundamental limit to meaning, a point at which a species can simply outgrow its will to live. It is a chilling thought that the ultimate purpose of achieving a godlike understanding of the universe might be the realization that it is, in the end, empty. It forces us to turn the mirror upon ourselves. Our own civilization is young, chaotic, and driven by seemingly endless ambition and desire. We cannot imagine a state of being where those drives are gone. But what will become of humanity in 1 million years, or 10 million, should we be so lucky as to survive? Will we still be striving, or will we have reached a similar state of quiet, philosophical exhaustion? The Saurian's choice suggests that survival is not the only metric of success, and that some stories find their most profound meaning not in their continuation, but in the perfection of their end. All of these narratives, transcendence, flight, cyclical return, and self-annihilation, are simply our attempts to give voice to an overwhelming silence. They are stories we weave from the threads of our own hopes and fears, projected onto the blank canvas of a mystery we may never solve. The truth could be a combination of these ideas, or, more likely, something so alien to our own experience that we lack the very concepts needed to grasp it. We are trying to understand the motives of a mind that was 200 million years old,
and our own is but a fleeting moment in comparison. Ultimately, we are left where we began, in the presence of a profound and intelligent silence. The abyssal lattice remains on the ocean floor, indifferent to our frantic speculation. It does not offer answers. It is itself the question. Perhaps this was the saurians' final, greatest gift. They did not leave us a history book or a user's manual for the universe. They left us a mirror, a silent, perfect enigma that forces us to confront the limits of our own knowledge, to question the nature of our own existence, and to wonder, in the deep, quiet hours of the night, what kind of silence we will one day leave behind. The discovery of the abyssal lattice fundamentally altered the human story, tearing out the first chapter we thought we knew and replacing it with a silent, alien preface. We are no longer the planet's firstborn intelligence, the lonely protagonists of Earth's grand narrative. Instead, we are the tenants who moved in after the original owners vanished, leaving behind a single, unreadable piece of furniture in the basement. This realization has instilled a profound planetary humility, a quiet sense of awe and trepidation that now underlies all our endeavors. Every ruin we unearth, every star we map, is now viewed through the lens of this older, greater, and quieter civilization. We are a sequel to a story whose original plot is lost to us, forever wondering if we are destined to repeat its unknown ending, living in the echo of their final, silent hush. The very concept of progress has been irrevocably fractured. For centuries, we measured our ascent by the height of our towers, the roar of our engines, and the scars we left upon the landscape. Our civilization was a noisy, messy, and extractive affair. The saurians present a devastating counterpoint, a civilization that may have existed for eons without leaving a single trace upon the land, a culture whose technology was not forged in fire, but grown in harmony with life. Their scarless existence forces us to ask a terrifying question. Is our loud, monumental way of life a sign of our power, or is it merely the clumsy, destructive signature of an adolescent species? We look at our concrete jungles and our poisoned rivers, and for the first time, we see them not as triumphs, but as the crude fingerprints of a consciousness that has not yet learned the wisdom of the whisper. This new history turns the scientific world inside out. The Fermi paradox, the perplexing silence of the stars, is no longer an astronomical problem, but a historical one. Perhaps the universe is not empty. Perhaps the wise have simply learned to be quiet. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence now begins not with radio telescopes pointed at distant galaxies, but with seismic sensors and genetic sequencers aimed at our own planet's deep past. A new field of science, paleointelligence, is born, a discipline that is part geology, part archaeology, and part ghost hunting. Its practitioners sift through the geological record not for bones, but for the faint residual echoes of a mind that thought in terms of millennia, a consciousness that mastered the art of being invisible to the crude tools of a future, lesser intelligence. If the saurian civilization truly achieved transcendence, then the ultimate goal of life is not expansion, but escape. This idea has seeped into the collective unconscious, creating new religions and philosophies centered on achieving a similar departure. They envision a future where humanity, too, learns to shed its fragile physical form, uploading its collective consciousness into a timeless digital substrate.
The abyssal lattice becomes a sacred icon, a symbol of this ultimate metamorphosis. In this worldview, space exploration is seen as a misguided, primitive impulse. Why struggle to colonize the cold, dead rocks of other worlds when the true frontier lies within, in the unlocking of consciousness from its biological prison? The great hush becomes not a tragedy, but an aspiration, a quiet promise of a final, perfect liberation from the suffering of material existence. Conversely, the hypothesis that they fled from a cosmic predator paints our universe in shades of unbearable dread. The silence of space is no longer a blank canvas for our dreams, but the sound of a forest where everyone is hiding. Our own history of broadcasting our existence into the cosmos, our radio waves, our television shows, our hopeful messages on golden records, is reframed as an act of catastrophic recklessness. We have been shouting our location into the dark, unaware of what might be listening. This paranoia would trigger a new global imperative, a concerted effort to become invisible. We might begin building our cities underground, shrouding our planet in cloaking technologies, and desperately trying to erase the noisy electronic signature we have been leaking into the void for over a century. The Great Hush becomes a terrifying lesson in cosmic discretion. The cyclical hypothesis offers a more comforting, yet profoundly challenging narrative. If we are the Earth's next flowering of consciousness, then we are not random accidents, but part of a grand, recurring planetary process. This bestows upon us a sacred duty. The abyssal lattice is not a tombstone, but a seed, a repository of wisdom left for us by our predecessors. This idea fuels a new, deeper environmentalism, one rooted not in fear or guilt, but in a sense of filial responsibility to the living planet that birthed us. Our purpose is not to conquer nature, but to integrate with it, to become its new nervous system, and to eventually, gracefully, make way for the next cycle. It suggests our destiny is not to leave the Earth, but to become more deeply a part of it, to learn the quiet art of tending to the garden we have inherited. Perhaps the most haunting interpretation is the one that requires no external forces at all, the idea of civilizational suicide. The thought that a species so ancient, wise, and powerful could simply choose to end its own story casts a long, cold shadow over all human ambition. It suggests that there is a terminal velocity to meaning, a point at which a civilization can answer all its questions and find the final answer to be nothing. This possibility would infect our art, our literature, our philosophy with a deep and persistent melancholy. If even a 200-million-year-old dynasty can succumb to existential exhaustion, what hope is there for our own fleeting, chaotic existence? The Great Hush becomes a memento mori for our entire species, a quiet reminder that the greatest threat to a god is its own omniscience. Our culture would inevitably become obsessed with this lost world. The silent, elegant forms of the Saurian civilization would inspire our architecture, our fashion, our art. Composers would write symphonies attempting to capture the sound of the Great Hush, a music defined by its silences and its deep, resonant drones. Filmmakers and novelists would tell endless stories, trying to imagine the lives and thoughts of these beings, projecting our own hopes and fears onto the blank canvas of their absence. Their ghost would become the central muse of the 21st century and beyond, a constant, silent collaborator in our own attempts to understand ourselves. We would be a culture defined not by our own achievements, but by our profound and unending conversation with a ghost. The abyssal lattice itself would become the focus of a global, multi-generational obsession. Deciphering its silent, geometric language would be the ultimate scientific quest, a project dwarfing all others in scale and importance. The greatest minds of every generation would dedicate their lives to teasing meaning from its inert, crystalline structure. It would be our Rosetta Stone for a history that has no other text. This quest could unite humanity in a shared purpose, a common goal that transcends national and political divides. Or it could become the source of new conflicts, as different factions, religions, and ideologies claim to have unlocked its true meaning, turning a message of silent wisdom into another source of loud, violent human disagreement. Our entire understanding of time and history would need to be rewritten. We have always viewed the past through a lens of linear progress, an inevitable march from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced. The Saurians demolish this simple narrative. They represent a completely different model of intelligent existence, one that was stable, sustainable, and integrated for a span of time that makes all of human history look like a brief, frantic flicker. Their legacy proves that there is not one single path for a civilization to follow. This realization would liberate our thinking, opening our minds to radically different possibilities for our own future, a future that might prioritize silence over noise, stability over growth, and wisdom over raw, untempered power. Ultimately, the discovery forces upon us a new and profound humility.
For so long we saw ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, the measure of all things, the sole possessors of the sacred fire of consciousness. Now we know we are merely the ones who found the cold ashes of a much older and perhaps much brighter flame. This knowledge could be our salvation. The arrogance that has driven our species to dominate and consume the planet might finally be tempered by the humbling realization that we are not masters of this world, but simply its current custodians. We walk in the footsteps of giants, and the quiet awe inspired by their silent departure may be the only thing that can teach us how to walk more softly ourselves. Inevitably, the mystery of the saurians would become a political and ideological battlefield. Their silent legacy would be twisted to serve the agendas of the living. Autocratic regimes might claim them as evidence of the need for a single, unified planetary consciousness. Anarcho-primitivists would see their scarless existence as a justification for dismantling all industrial society. Corporations might try to patent and reverse engineer the lattice's exotic materials. The saurians, who lived and departed in a state of quiet harmony, would be posthumously recruited into all of our noisiest, most divisive conflicts. We would prove unable to simply stand in awe of their mystery, compelled instead to turn their silent, elegant ghost into a weapon in our own petty wars. On a personal level, living with this knowledge would change the very texture of an individual human life. How do you go about your day, worrying about mortgages and deadlines, knowing that you are part of a second draft of life on Earth? For some, it might induce a kind of existential vertigo, a sense that individual lives are utterly meaningless against the backdrop of such deep cosmic time. For others, it could have the opposite effect, imbuing each fleeting moment of consciousness with a precious, sacred weight. Our brief, noisy lives become all the more beautiful and poignant when seen as a tiny, fleeting melody played against the vast, eternal silence left behind by our predecessors. Perhaps the greatest gift the saurians left us is the silence itself. The fact that the abyssal lattice is indecipherable, that its message remains locked away, is not a failure, but its ultimate success. It does not give us answers we can simply copy, nor a technology we can exploit. It gives us a question, a perfect and eternal mystery that will forever drive our curiosity and fuel our imagination. It forces us to find our own way, to write our own story, to define our own purpose. They did not leave us a map, they left us a mirror, forcing us to look at ourselves and decide what kind of civilization we want to be, what kind of legacy we will choose to build. And so we are left gazing into that silent, abyssal mirror, profoundly aware of the history that sleeps beneath our feet. The great hush was not an ending, it was a transition. It was the closing of one chapter, and the quiet, unwritten beginning of another. We are now the authors of that new chapter, and the story of the saurians forces us to confront the ultimate question. What will our own silence sound like when our time is done? Will it be the sudden, chaotic silence of a world broken by its own ambition? Or will we, having learned from the ghosts of this planet, finally master the art of leaving behind a silence that is as graceful, as deliberate, and as full of meaning as the one we inherited? And so we return to the beginning, to a flicker of light that was not a harbinger of doom, but merely a passing shadow in the prehistoric sky. The question was never truly about survival, but about what survival means over the vast, silent expanse of geological time. We sought a story of continued dominion, of saurian giants walking through a Cenozoic world. Instead, we found a ghost story, a mystery of an empire that vanished not with a bang, but with a whisper. The discovery of the abyssal lattice did not solve this mystery. It simply gave it a name and a form, transforming the deafening silence of absence into the profound, intelligent silence of a choice we cannot comprehend. We looked for the descendants of dinosaurs, and found instead that we are their successors, living in a house whose previous owners left behind a single, unreadable note, a quiet testament to a story greater than our own. Their legacy is this silence, this one perfect, scarless act of vanishing, leaving behind a single, elegant question mark buried in the heart of the world. And what will our legacy be? We who write our story in a language of concrete and steel, of chemical spills and atmospheric noise. We who measure our progress by the volume of our clamor and the depth of the wounds we inflict upon the planet's surface. The saurians present a devastating counterpoint,
a civilization that may have achieved a planetary consciousness and then departed with the grace of a setting sun, leaving the world clean for what came next. Their silent departure forces us to look at our own noisy existence and ask whether our monuments of stone and light are signs of our dominance, or merely the frantic, desperate scribbles of a species that has not yet learned the profound power that lies in being quiet. Perhaps the greatest gift they left us is the indecipherable nature of their final message. The lattice does not speak to us in a language we can understand.
It offers no easy answers, no technological secrets to exploit, no philosophical certainties to adopt. It simply is. It is a perfect silent mirror, reflecting back at us the limits of our own understanding, the smallness of our own temporal perspective. Its silence forces us to create our own meaning, to write our own story, without the guidance of our elders. The mystery is not a puzzle to be solved, but a space to be inhabited, a quiet, contemplative space that invites us not to know, but to wonder. It is a permanent monument to the idea that the most important truths are not those that are shouted, but those that are quietly and patiently discovered within. We are a species haunted by the ghost of a better, or at least a quieter way of being. We live now in the shadow of their great unknown choice. Whether they transcended to a higher plane, fled a cosmic terror, returned to the planetary source, or simply chose a dignified end to a story that was complete, their act has become the central myth of our own civilization. We are forever the second act, the children who grew up in a house where the parents have mysteriously disappeared. This knowledge has settled deep into our bones, a quiet, humbling awareness that we are not the masters of this world, but merely its current caretakers. Every star we reach for, every truth we uncover, will forever be measured against the silent, inscrutable wisdom of those who came before, and the profound, planet-wide hush they left in their wake. In the end, the question that began with a cosmic near miss has turned inward, becoming a question about ourselves. The great hush was not a conclusion. It was a transition from one form of consciousness to another. And as we now stand in the quiet echo of their departure, we are left to ponder the nature of our own. What will our transition be? When the long arc of our own civilization finally reaches its twilight, what will our silence sound like? Will it be the frantic, broken silence of a world exhausted by its own noise? Or will we, having listened for generations to the whispers from the deep, finally learn the grace of a quiet exit, leaving behind for the next chapter of life on Earth not a ruin, but a resonance, not an answer, but a single, perfect, and beautiful question?